directions of space. Alastair Reynolds. Alastair Reynolds is a frequent contributor to Interzone, and has also sold to Asimov Science Fiction, Spectrum SF, and elsewhere. His first novel, Revelation Space, was widely hailed as one of the major SF books of the year. It was quickly followed by Chasm City, Redemption Arc, Absolution Gap, Century Reign, and Pushing Ice. All big, sprawling space operas that were big sellers as well, establishing Reynolds as one of the best and most popular new SF writers to enter the field in many years. His other books include a novella collection, Diamond Dogs, Turquoise Days. His most recent books are a novel, The Prefect, and two collections, Galactic North and Zima Blue and Other Stories. Coming up is a new novel, House of Sun, and a chapbook novella from Subterranean Press, The Six Directions of Space. A professional scientist with a PhD in astronomy, he worked for the European Space Agency in the Netherlands for a number of years, but has recently moved back to his native Wales to become a full-time writer. Reynolds's work is known for its grand scope, sweep, and scale. In one story, Galactic North, a spaceship sets out in pursuit of another in a stern chase that takes thousands of years of time and hundreds of thousands of light years to complete. In another, Thousandth Night, ultra-rich immortals embark on a plan that will call for the physical rearrangement of all the stars in the galaxy. In the hard-hitting and unsettling story that follows, he shows us a brutal galactic empire embattling itself to defend against attacks by other empires that come not just from elsewhere in the galaxy, but from other universes altogether. We had been riding for 2 hours when I tugged sharply on the reins to bring my pony to a halt. Tenger, my escort, rode on for a few paces before glancing back irritatedly. He muttered something in annoyance, a phrase that contained the words stupid and dyke, before steering his horse back alongside mine. "Another sightseeing stop?" he asked, as the two mismatched animals chewed their bits, flared their nostrils, and flicked their heads up in mutual impatience. I said nothing, damned if I was going to give him the pleasure of an excuse. I only wanted to take in the view, the deeply shadowed valley below, the rising hills beyond, curving ever upwards like a tidal wave formed from rock and soil and grass, and the little patch of light down in the darkness, the square formation of the still-moving caravan. "If you really want to make that appointment," Tenger continued. "Shut up." Tenger sniffed, dug into a leather flap on his belt, and popped something into his mouth. "On your own head be it, Yellow Dog. It certainly won't be my neck on the line, keeping the old man waiting." I held both reins in one hand, so that I could cup the other one against my ear. I turned the side of my head in the direction of the caravan and closed my eyes. After a few moments, I convinced myself that I could hear it. It was a sound almost on the edge of audibility, but which would become thunderous, calamitous, world-destroying as they drew nearer. The sound of thousands of riders, hundreds of wheeled tents, dozens of monstrous siege engines. A sound very much like the end of the world itself, it must have seemed, when the caravan approached. "We can go now," I told Tenger. He dug his spurs in, almost drawing blood, his horse pounding away so quickly that it kicked dirt into my eyes. Goyo snorted and gave chase. We raced down into the valley, sending skylarks and snipe barreling into the air. "Just going by the rules, Yellow Dog," the guard said, apologizing for making me show him my passport. We were standing on the wheeled platform of the Imperial Gare. The guard wore a knee-length blue sash-tied coat, long black hair cascading from the dome of his helmet. "We're on high alert, as it is. 3 plausible threats in the last week." "Usual nut jobs," I said, casting a wary glance at Tenger, who was attending to Goyo with a bad-tempered expression. I had beaten him to the caravan, and he did not like that. "Two Islamist sects, one bunch of Nestorians," the guard answered. "Not that I'm saying that the old man has anything to fear from you, of course, but we have to follow protocol." "I understand fully. Frankly, we were beginning to wonder if you were ever coming back." He looked at me solicitously. "Some of us were beginning to wonder if you had been disavowed." I smiled. "Disavowed? I don't think so. Just saying, we're all assuming you've got something suitably juicy after all this time." I reached up to tie back my hair. Juicy's not exactly the word I'd use, but it's definitely something he has to hear about. The guard touched a finger to the pearl on his collar. "Better go inside, in that case." I did as I was invited. My audience with the Khan was neither as private nor as lengthy as I might have wished, but in all other respects it was a success. One of his wives was there, as well as Minister Chiledu, the National Security Advisor, and the Khan was notoriously busy during the ceremonial restaging of the war caravan. I thought not for the first time of how old he looked. Much older than the young man who had been elected to this office 7 years earlier, brimming with plans and promises. Now he was graying and tired, worn down by disappointing polls and the pressures of managing an empire that was beginning to fray at the edges. The caravan was supposed to be an antidote to all that. In this, the 999th year since the death of the founder, we would celebrate this birthday, but no one knows when it happened. A special effort had been made to create the largest caravan in decades, with almost every local system commander in attendance. As I stepped off the gare to collect Goeo and begin my mission, I felt something perilously close to elation. The data I had presented to the Khan, the troubling signs I had detected concerning the functioning and security of the infrastructure, had been taken seriously. The Khan could have waved aside my concerns as an issue for his successor, but, to his credit, I think, he had not. I had been given license and funds to gather more information, even if that meant voyaging to the Kuchlug Special Administrative Volume and operating under the nose of Chilyan, one of the men who had been making life difficult for the Khan these last few years. And yet my mood of elation was short-lived. I had no sooner set my feet on the ground floor than I spied Tinger. He was bullying Goyo, jerking hard on his bridle, kicking a boot against his hocks. He was so preoccupied with his business that he did not see me approaching from behind his back. I took hold of a good, thick clump of his hair and snapped his head back as far as it would go. He released the bridle, staggering back under the pressure I was applying. I whispered in his ear, "No one hurts my horse, you ignorant piece of shit." Then I spun him around, the hair tearing out in my fist, and kneed him hard in the groin, so that he coughed out a groan of pain and nausea, and bent double, like a man about to vomit. Some say that it is heaven's mandate that we should have the stars, just as it was the will of heaven that our army should bring the squabbling lands of Greater Mongolia under one system of governance, a polity so civilized that a woman could ride naked from the western shores of Europe to the eastern edge of China without once being molested. I say that it is simply the case that we, call us Mongols, call us humans, it scarcely matters now, have always made the best of what we are given. Take the Nexus in Gansu's system, for instance. It was a medium-sized moon that had been hollowed out nearly all the way to its middle, leaving a shell barely 100 li thick, with a small round kernel buttressed to the shell by 99 golden spokes. Local traffic entered and departed the Nexus via apertures at the northern and southern poles. Not that there was much local traffic to speak of. Gansu, with its miserly red sun, only just large enough to sustain fusion, and handful of desolate, volatile, poor, and radiation-lashed rocky worlds, was neither a financial nor military hub, nor a place that figured prominently in tourist itineraries. As was often the case, It was something of a puzzle why the worm-like Korkoi had built the nexus in such a miserable location to begin with. Unpromising material, but in the 500 years since we first reopened a portal into the infrastructure, we had made a glittering bauble out of it. 5 major trunk routes converged on Gansu, including a high-capacity branch of the Caroline Corridor, the busiest path in the entire network. In addition, the moon offered portals to a dozen secondary routes, 4 of which had been rated stable enough to allow passage by Juggernaut-class ships. Most of those secondary routes led to stellar population centers of some economic importance, including the Kiriltuk, Tatatunga, and Chilagoon administrative volumes, each of which encompassed more than 50 settled systems and around 1,000 habitable worlds. Even the routes which led to nowhere of particular importance were well traveled by prospectors and adventurers, hoping to find Korkoi relics, or that fever dream of all chancers, an unmapped nexus. We did not know the function of the 99 spokes, or of the core they buttressed. No matter. The core made a useful foundation, a place upon which to build. From the vantage point of the rising shuttle, it was a scribble of luminous neon, packed tight as a migraine. I could not distinguish the lights of individual buildings, only the larger glowing demarcations of the precincts between city-sized districts. Pressurized horseways a whole li wide were thin, snaking scratches. The human presence had even begun to climb up the golden spokes, pushing tendrils of light out to the moon's inner surface. Commercial slogans spelled themselves out in letters 10 li high. On Founders' Day, drink only Temujin brand Airrog. Sorkin Shira rental ponies have low mileage, excellent stamina, and good temperament. Treat your favorite wife. Buy her only Zarnuk silks. During hunting season, safeguard your assets with Nufar Samarkand mutual insurance. Think you're a real man? Then you should be drinking Deathworm Airrog, the one with a sting at both ends. I had spent only one night in Gansu, arranging a eunuch and waiting for the smaller ship that would carry us the rest of the way to the Kuchlug. Now Goyo, the eunuch, and I were being conveyed to the Birken Khaldun, a vessel that was even smaller than the Blackheart Mountain that had brought me to Gansu. The BK was only 1 li from end to end, less than a quarter of that across the bow. The hull was a multicolored quilt of patch repairs, with many scratches, craters, and scorches yet to be attended to. The lateral stabilization vanes had the slightly buckled look of something that had been badly bent and then hammered back into shape, while the yaw dampeners appeared to have originated from a completely different ship, fixed on with silvery fillets of recent welding work. A whole line of windows had been plated over. As old as the BK might have been, it had taken more than just age and neglect to bring her to that state. The Parvin Tract was a notoriously rough passage, quickly taking its toll on even a new ship. If the Caroline Corridor was a wide, stately river which could almost be navigated blindfold, then the tract was a series of narrow rapids, whose treacherous properties varied from trip to trip, requiring not just expert input from the crew, but passengers with the constitution to tolerate a heavy crossing. Once I had checked into my rooms and satisfied myself that Goyo was being taken care of, I made my way back to the passenger area. I bought a glass of Temujin Airrog and made my way to the forward viewing platform, with its wide sweep of curved window, scratched and scuffed in places, worryingly starred in others, and leaned hard against the protective railing. The last shuttle had already detached, and the BK was accelerating towards the portal, its great human-made doors irising open at the last possible moment, so that the interior of Gansu was protected from the Parvin Tract's unpredictable energy surges. Even though the infrastructure shaft stretched impossibly far into the distance, my mind kept insisting that we were about to punch through the thin skin of the moon. The ship surged forward, the sluggish artificial gravity generators struggling to maintain the local vertical. We passed through the door into the superluminal machinery of the infrastructure. The tunnel walls were many li away, but they felt closer, as they raced by at increasing speed, velocity traced by the luminous squiggly patterns that had been inscribed on the wall for inscrutable reasons by the Korkoi builders. I had the impression that the shaft was constricting, tightening down on our fragile little ship. Yet nothing seemed to disconcert or even arouse the interest of my fellow passengers. In ones and twos they drifted away from the gallery, leaving me alone with my eunuch. Observing from a discreet distance, I drank the air-og very slowly, looking down the racing shaft, wondering if it would be my fortune to see a phantom with my own eyes. Phantoms, after all, were what had brought me here. Now, all I had to do was poison the eunuch. The eunuch answered to eunuch, but his real name, I learned after a certain amount of probing, was Tisa. He had not been surgically castrated. There was an implant somewhere in his forearm dispensing the necessary cocktail of androgen blockers, suppressing his libido and lending him a mildly androgynous appearance. Other implants, similar to those employed by government operatives, had given him heightened reflexes, spatial coordination, and enhanced night vision. He was adept with weapons and unarmed combat, as, I have no cause to doubt, were all Batu eunuchs. I had no need of his protection, of course, but appearances were paramount. I was posing as a woman of means, a well-heeled tourist. No woman in my circumstances would ever have traveled without the accompaniment of a man such as Tisa. He served my purpose in another way. We shared the same rooms, with the eunuch sleeping in a small doorless annex connected to mine. Because I might, conceivably, be drugged or poisoned, Tisa always ate the same meals as me, served at the same time and brought to my cabin by one of the BK's white-uniformed stewards. "What if you get poisoned and die on me?" I asked, innocently, when we were sitting opposite together across my table. He tapped a pudgy finger against his belly. "It would take a lot to kill me, Miss Bochum. My constitution has been tailored to process many toxins in common circulation among would-be assassins and miscreants. I will become ill much sooner than you would, but what would kill you would merely make me unwell, and not so unwell that I could not discharge my duties. I hope you're right about that." He patted his chin with napkin. "It is no occasion for pride. I am what I am because of the chemical intervention and surgery of the Batu Escort Agency. It would be equally pointless to understate my abilities." Later, feigning nervousness, I told him that I had heard a noise from his annex. "It is nothing, I assure you. No one could have entered these rooms without our knowing it." It sounded like someone breathing. He smiled tolerantly. "There are many foreign sounds on a ship like this. Noises carry a great distance through the ducts and conduits of the air circulation system." Couldn't someone have crawled through those same conduits? He rose from the table without a note of complaint. "It is unlikely, but I shall investigate." As soon as he had vanished through the door into his annex, I produced a vial from my pocket and tipped its sugary contents onto the remains of his meal. I heard him examining things, pulling open cupboard doors and sliding drawers. By the time he returned, with a reassuring expression on his face, the toxin crystals had melted invisibly into his food, and the vial was snug in my pocket. "Whatever you heard, there's no one in there." "Are you sure?" "Completely. But I'm willing to look again if it would put your mind at ease." I looked abashed. "I'm just being silly." "Not at all. You must not be afraid to bring things to my attention. It is what you have hired me for." "Tuck in," I said, nodding at his meal, "before it gets cold." Tisa was moaning and sweating on the bed, deep in fever, as Mr. Taiyong appraised him warily. "Did he tell you he could detect poisons? They don't all come with that option." He can. Isn't that the point? It could just be a bug he's picked up. On the other hand, he may have been hit by something intended for you that his system wasn't designed to filter out. A poison? It's a possibility, Miss Bo-chung. Taeyong was a steward, a young man with a pleasant face and a highly professional manner. I had seen him around earlier, but, as was the case with all the crew, he had steadfastly refused to engage in any conversation not related to my immediate needs. I had counted on this, and contrived the poisoning of the eunuch to give me heightened access to one or more of the crew. It need not have been Taeyong, but my instincts told me that he would serve excellently. "Then why isn't it affecting me?" I asked. "I don't wish to alarm you, but it could be that it's going to in a very short while. We need to get both of you into the sick bay. Under observation, we should be able to stabilize the eunuch and ensure you come to no harm." This was the outcome I had been hoping for, but some indignation was called for. "If you think I'm going to spend the rest of this trip in some stinking sick bay, after I've paid for this cabin—" Taeyong raised a calming hand. "It won't be for long. A day or two, just to be on the safe side. Then you can enjoy the rest of the trip in comfort." Another pair of stewards was summoned to help shift the hapless Tisa, while I made my way to the sick bay on foot. "Actually," I said, "now that you mention it, I do feel a little peculiar." Taeyong looked at me sympathetically. "Don't worry, Miss Bo-chung. We'll have you right as rain in no time." The sick bay was larger and better equipped than I had been expecting, almost as if it belonged in a different ship entirely. I was relieved to see that no one else was using it. Taeyong helped me onto a reclined couch, while the other stewards pulled a screen around the stricken eunuch. "How do you feel now?" Taeyong asked, fastening a black cuff around my forearm. "Still a bit funny." For the next few minutes, Taeyong, who had clearly been given basic medical training, studied the readouts on a handheld display he had pulled from a recess in the wall. "Well, it doesn't look—" he began. "I should have listened to my friends," I said, shaking my head. "They told me not to come here." He tapped buttons set into the side of the display. "Your friends warned you that you might end up getting poisoned?" "Not exactly, no. But they said it wasn't a good idea traveling on the Birkin Khaldun down the Parvin Tract." "They were right, weren't they?" "That would depend. So far I can't see any sign that you've ingested anything poisonous. Of course, it could be something that the analyzer isn't equipped to detect." And the eunuch— "Just a moment," Taeyong said, leaving the display suspended in the air. He walked over to the other bed and pulled aside the curtain. I heard a murmured exchange before he returned, with a bit less of a spring in his step. "Well, there's no doubt that something pretty heavy's hit his system. Could be a deliberate toxin. Could be something nasty that just happened to get into him. We're not far out of Gansu. He could have contracted something there that's only just showing up. He's been poisoned, Mr. Taeyong. My bodyguard. Doesn't that strike you as a slightly ominous development? I still say it could be something natural. We'll know soon enough. In the meantime, I wouldn't necessarily jump to the conclusion that you're in immediate peril." "I'm concerned, Mr. Taeyong." "Well, don't be. You're in excellent hands." He leaned over to plump my pillow. "Get under the blanket if you feel shivery. Is there anything you'd like me to fetch from your room?" "No, thank you." "In which case I'll leave you be. I'll keep the analyzer attached, just in case it flags anything. The other stewards are still here. If you need anything, just call." "I will." He was on the verge of leaving. I had no doubt that he was a busy man, when something caused him to narrow his eyes. "So if it wasn't about being poisoned, Miss Bo-chung, why exactly was it that your friends didn't want you taking this ship?" "Oh, that." I shook my head. It's silly. I don't know why I mentioned it at all. It's not as if I believe any of that nonsense. Any of what nonsense, exactly? You know, about the phantoms. About how the Parvin tract is haunted. I told them I was above all that, but they still kept going on about it. They said that if I took this ship, I might never come back. Of course, that only made me even more determined. Good for you. I told them I was a rationalist, not someone who believes in ghosts and goblins. I shifted on the couch, giving him a sympathetic look. I expect that you're fed up with hearing about all that, especially as you actually work here. I mean, if anyone would have been likely to see something, it would be you, wouldn't it? Or one of the other crew. That would make sense, he said. Well, the fact that you obviously haven't, there can't be anything to it, can there? I crossed my arms and smiled triumphantly. Wait until I tell my friends how silly they've been. Perhaps, he began, and then fell silent. I knew that I had him then, that it would be only a matter of time before Taiyang felt compelled to show me evidence. My instincts proved correct, for within a day of my discharge from the sick bay, the eunuch was still under observation, but making satisfactory progress, the steward contrived an excuse to visit my quarters. He had a clean towel draped over his arm, as if he had come to replace the one in my bathroom. I brought you a fresh one. I think the cleaning section missed this corridor this morning. They didn't, but I appreciate the gesture all the same. He lingered, as if he had something to get off his chest, but was struggling to find the right words. Mr. Taiyang, I pressed. What we were talking about before... Yes, I inquired mildly. Well, you're wrong. He said it nicely enough, but the defiance in his words was clear. The phantoms exist. I may not have seen anything with my own eyes, but I've seen data that's just as convincing. I doubt it. I can show you easily enough. He must have been intending to say those words from the moment he had decided to come to my cabin, yet now that he had spoken them, his regret was immediate. Really? I shouldn't have. Tell me, I said forcefully. Whatever this is, I want to see it. It means your friends were right and you were wrong. Then I need to know that. Taiyang gave me a warning look. It'll change the way you think. At the moment, you have the luxury of not believing in the phantoms. I know that there's something out there that we don't understand, something that doesn't belong. Are you sure you want that burden? If you can handle it, I think I can. What do I have to do? I need to show you something, but I can't do it now. Later, during the night shift, it'll be quieter. I'll be ready, I said, nodding eagerly. Close to midnight, Taiyang came for me. Remembering to keep in character for someone half convinced she was the target of an assassin, I did not open up immediately. Yes? It's me, Taiyang. I cracked open the door. I'm ready. He looked me up and down. Take off those clothes, please. I'm sorry. He glanced away, blushing. What I mean is, wear as much or as little as you would wear for bed. I noticed that he had a jacket draped over his arm, as if he was ready to put it around my shoulders. Should we meet someone and should questions be asked, you will explain that I found you sleepwalking and that I'm taking you back to your cabin via the most discreet route I can think of, so you don't embarrass yourself in front of any other passengers. I see. You've given this some thought, haven't you? You aren't the first skeptical passenger, Miss Bochung. I closed the door and disrobed, then put on thin silk trousers and an equally thin silk blouse, the one scarlet and the other electric yellow, with a design of small blue wolves. I untied my hair and messed it to suggest someone only recently roused from the bed. Outside, as was customary during the night shift of the BK's operations, the corridor lights were dimmed to a sleepy amber. The bars, restaurants, and gaming rooms were closed. The public lounges were deserted and silent, save for the scurrying, mouse-like cleaning robots that always emerged after the people had gone away. Taiyang chose his route well, for we did not bump into any other passengers or crew. "This is the library," he said, when we had arrived in a small, red-lit room set with shelves, screens, and movable chairs. "No one uses it much. It's not exactly a high priority for most of our passengers. They'd rather drink away the voyage with Tenjin Airog." "Are we allowed here?" "Well, technically, there'd be nothing to stop you visiting this room during normal ship hours. But during normal ship hours, I wouldn't be able to show you what I'm about to." He was trying to be nonchalant about the whole adventure, but his nervousness was like a boy on a dare. "But don't worry, we won't get into trouble." How was a library going to change my mind about the phantoms? "Let me show you." He ushered me to one of the terminals, swinging out a pair of hinged stools for us to sit on. I sat to the left of him, while Taiyang flipped open a dust cover to expose a keyboard. He began to tap at the keys, causing changes to the hooded data display situated at eye level. "As it happens, these consoles are connected to the Birkin Khaldoon's own computers. You just have to know the right commands." "Won't this show up?" He shook his head. "I'm not doing anything that will come to anyone's attention. Besides, I'm perfectly entitled to access this data. The only thing wrong is you being with me, and if anyone comes down here, we'll have time to prepare for them, to make it look as if I caught you sleepwalking." He fell silent for a minute or so, tapping through options, obviously navigating his way through to the information stored in the computer's memory bank. "I just hope the company spooks haven't got to it already," he murmured. "Every now and then someone from Blue Heaven comes aboard and wipes large chunks of the BK's memory. They say they're just doing routine archiving, clearing space for more data, but no one believes that. Looks like we're in time, though. I didn't see any spooks nosing around when we were in Gansu. They'll probably come aboard next time we're back." He glanced over his shoulder. "I'll show it to you once. Then we go, all right?" "Whatever you say, Mr. Taiyang." The BK has cameras pointed into the direction of flight. They detect changes in the tunnel geometry and feed that data to the servo motors driving the stabilizing vanes and yaw dampers so that they can make adjustments to smooth out the turbulence. They're also there as an emergency measure in case we encounter another ship coming the other way, one that isn't on schedule or hasn't got an active transponder. The cameras give us just enough warning to swerve the BK to one side, to give passing clearance. It's bumpy for the passengers when that happens, but a lot better than a head-on collision at tunnel speeds. "I take it the cameras saw something," I said. Taiyang nodded. "This was a couple of trips ago, about halfway between Gansu and Kuchlug. They only got 8 clear frames. Whatever it was moving fast, much quicker than one of our ships. The 4th, 5th, and 6th frames are the sharpest." "Show me." He tapped keys. A picture sprang onto the display, all fuzzy green hues overlaid with date stamps and other information. It took a moment before I was sure what I was looking at. There was some kind of pale green smudge filling half the frame, a random-looking shape like the blind spot one sees after looking at the sun for too long. And beyond that, a suggestion of the curving squiggles of the tunnel's Korkoi patterning, reaching away to infinity. I pressed a finger against the smudge. "That's the phantom." "This is frame 3. It becomes clearer on the next one." He advanced to the next image, and I saw what he meant. The smudge had enlarged, but also become sharper, with details beginning to emerge, edges and surfaces, a hint of organized structure, even if the overall shape was still elusive. "Next frame," Taiyang mouthed. Now there could be no doubt that the phantom was some kind of ship, even if it conformed to the pattern of no vessel I had ever seen. It was sleek and organic-looking, more like a darting squid than the clunky lines of the BK. He advanced to the next frame, but while the image did not become substantially clearer, the angle changed, so that the three-dimensional structure of the phantom became more apparent. At the same time, hints of patterning had begun to emerge. Darker green symbols on the side of the hull, or fuselage, or body of whatever the thing was. "That's about as good as it gets," Taiyang said. "I'm impressed." "You see these arm-like appendages?" he asked, pointing to part of the image. "I'm guessing, of course, but I can't help wondering if they don't serve the same function as our stabilization vanes, only in a more elegant fashion." "I think you could be right." "One thing I'm sure of, though. We didn't build that ship. I'm no expert, Miss Bo-Chung, but I know what counts as cutting-edge ship design. And that thing is way beyond it. I don't think anyone would argue with that. It wasn't built by the government or some mysterious splinter group of Islamist separatists. In fact, I don't think it was built by humans at all. We're looking at alien technology, and they're using our infrastructure system as if they own it. More than that, every now and then you hear about entire ships and message packets going missing. They're not just trespassing in our network, they're stealing from it as well. I can see Blue Heaven would rather this didn't get out." Taiyang closed the display. "I'm sorry, but that's all I can show you." "It's enough, though, isn't it?" "More than enough," I said. Of course, I had my doubts. Taiyang could have easily faked those images, or been the unwitting victim of someone else's fakery. But I did not think that was the case. I had been looking at genuine data, not something cooked up to scare the tourists. I was just beginning to plot my next move, how I would get a copy of the data and smuggle it back to NHK while I continued with my investigations in Kuchlog space, when I became aware of a presence behind me. Taiyang must have sensed it too, for he turned around as I did. Standing in the doorway to the library was one of the other stewards, an older man whose name I had yet to learn. I noticed that the sleeves of his uniform were too short for him. Wordlessly, he raised a hand. In it glinted the smooth alloy form of a small, precise weapon, the kind often carried by government spies such as myself. He shot me. I had a moment to stare at the barb embedded in my thigh, and then I passed out. I came around in my cabin, gripped by a vile nausea, a headache like a slowly closing iron vise, and no conception of how much time had passed since Taiyang and I had been disturbed in the library. Getting out of bed, I had been placed on top of the sheets. I searched the adjoining annex for the eunuch before I remembered that he was still in the sick bay. I tried my door and found that it had been locked from the outside. There was no way for me to leave my room. Understand, I did not accept my imprisonment lightly, but understand also that all my attempts at escape proved futile. I could not even squeeze through the conduit I had mentioned to the eunuch. Such methods succeed in adventure stories, but not in real life. Of course, it was desired that I be kept alive. The man who had shot me could have administered a fatal dose simply by twisting a dial in the grip of his weapon. He had chosen not to, and it was no accident that food and water appeared in the room's serving hatch at regular intervals. But as to who had chosen to detain me, I was uninformed. I could guess, though. He was the first to see me when the ship docked in Kuchlug space. He came to my room, accompanied by guards. He was as squat and muscled as a wrestler, his bare arms fully as thick as my thighs. He wore a leather jerkin, crisscrossed by thick black belts to which were fastened various ceremonial weapons and symbols of martial authority. A carefully tended mustache curled down on either side of his mouth, with a tiny but deliberate tuft of hair preserved under his lower lip. A stiff leather helmet, long at the sides and back, covered the rest of his head. The only visible part of his hair was a blunt wedge-shaped fringe terminating just above his eyebrows, which were at once finely drawn, expressive, and deeply quizzical. Of course I knew the face. "Commander Chilyan," I said. "Yes, I get about." His hands were impressively hairy, scarred, and knotted like the roots of a very old tree. He snapped his fingers at the guards. "Have her brought to the debriefing facility on the Qing Shui moon. Bring the pony as well." Then he poked one of those fingers under my chin, lifting it up so that our eyes met. "Give some thought to the particulars of your story, Miss Bo-Chung. It may make all the difference." They took me down to the moon. We landed somewhere, and I was carried through dark, rusting corridors to a windowless holding cell. The floor rocked with a slow, sickening motion, as if I was on a ship at sea in a high swell, even though there were no oceans in the Qing Shui moon. They stripped me, took away my belongings, and gave me prison clothing to wear, a simple one-piece affair in orange silk. I pretended to be shocked and disorientated, but I was already summoning my training, recollecting those stratagems I had been taught to withstand prolonged detention and interrogation. As the guards were shutting the door on me, I contrived to slip a finger into the crack between the door and its frame. When the door closed, I yelped in pain and withdrew my hand with the fingertips squashed and red from the pressure. I sucked it in my mouth until the pain abated. "Stupid bitch," someone said. There was a bunk, a spigot in the wall that dribbled tepid, piss-colored water, and a hole in the floor with chipped ceramic sides stained an unspeakable brown. Light seeped in through a grill in the door. Neither willing nor able to sleep, I lay on the bunk and shivered. Presently, no more than 2 or 3 hours after my arrival, men came to take me down the corridor to an interrogation room. It is not necessary to document all that happened. The many weeks that it took for me to permit them to peel back the layers of identity I had wrapped around myself, each time thinking that the victory was theirs. Suffice to say that most of what they did to me involved electricity and chemicals in varying combinations. They did break 2 fingers on my left hand, including the one I had trapped in the door, but when they pulled out one of my fingernails, it was from the other hand, not the one I had hurt. They beat me around, broke my teeth, extinguished Yusuge brand cigarettes on my skin, but only cut me superficially to demonstrate that they could and would. Then they had other men come in to sterilize and dress the wounds. Once in a while, a gowned doctor with a Slavic face came to the cell and gave me a thorough, probing medical examination. It was during one of the doctor's examinations that I elected to reveal myself as a government spy. As the doctor was examining me, I allowed my hair, stiff and greasy with dirt, to fall away from the nape of my neck. I knew instantly that he had taken the bait. I felt his fingers press into the area around the subcutaneous device, feeling for the hard-edged component lodged under the skin. "What is this?" "What is what?" I asked, all innocence. "There's something under your skin." They took me back to the interrogation room. My hair was shaved and my neck swabbed. The Slavic doctor dithered over the medical tools on the shelves until he found the bundle he wanted. He brought the instruments onto the table, unrolling the towel so that I could see what lay in store for me. When he was done, the implant was placed on a piece of clean towel in front of me. It was bloodied, with bits of whitish flesh still attached to its feeler-like input probes. "Looks like government," someone said. I did not admit to it immediately. That would have made them rightfully suspicious. It was a matter of judging the moment, making my confession appear natural rather than a scripted event. In hindsight, I wish that I had arranged my confession sooner. I was brought to a different room. There was a window in the wall, before which I was encouraged to sit. A clamp was fitted around my eyes so that I could not look away. The doctor dripped some agent into my eyes, which had the effect of paralyzing the lids, preventing me from blinking. When the lights came on in the room on the other side of the window, I found myself looking at Goyo. He was upside down, suspended in a sling, rotated on his back in the manner that horses are prepared for veterinary work. The sling was supported from a heavy white framework mounted on trolley wheels. Goyo's legs had been bound together in pairs using thick adhesive material. Even his head and neck had been braced into position using cushioned supports and clamps. A leathery girth strap enclosed his waist, preventing him from thrashing around. His abdominal region, between fore and hind limbs, had been shaved to the skin. A white sheet, not much larger than a towel, had been draped over part of that shaven area. There was a red stain in the middle of the sheet, where it formed a depression. Goyo's eye, the one that I could see, was white and wild and brimming with fear. Chilian walked into the room. He was dressed as I remembered him from our encounter on the BK, except that his hands and forearms were now gloved. The gloves had a heavy martial look to them, with curved steel talons on the ends of the fingers. He stopped next to Goyo, one hand resting on the frame, the other stroking my pony's neck, as if he sought to placate him. When he spoke, his voice came through a microphone. "We think we know who you are, but some corroboration would be welcome. What is your operational code name? To which section are you assigned? Are you one of the 13? My mouth had turned dry. I said nothing. "Very well," Chilian continued, as if he had expected as much. He reached over and whisked the white sheet away from Goyo's abdomen. There was a wound there, a red sucking hole wide enough to plunge a fist through. "No," I said, trying to break free of the straps that bound me to the chair. "Before you arrived," Chilian said, "certain surgical preparations were made. A number of ribs have already been removed. They can be put back, of course, but their absence now means that there is an unobstructed path through to your pony's heart." With his right hand, he reached into the wound. He frowned, concentrating on the task. He delved in slowly, cautiously. Goyo responded by thrashing against his restraints, but it was to more avail than my own efforts. In a short while, Chilian's entire fist was hidden. He pushed deeper, encountering resistance. Now the fist and fully half of his forearm was gone. He adjusted his posture, leaning in so that his chest was braced against Goyo's shoulder. He pushed deeper until only the top extremity of the glove remained visible. "I am touching his beating heart now," Chilian said, looking directly at me. "He's a strong one, no doubt about that. A fine pony from good Mongol stock. But I am stronger, at least when I have my hand on his heart. You don't think I can stop it beating? I assure you I can. Would you like to see?" The expression on his face altered to one of concentrated effort, little veins bulging at the side of his temple. Goyo thrashed with renewed energy. Yes, he feels it now. He doesn't know what's happening, but a billion years of dumb evolution tells him something's not right. I don't doubt that the pain is excruciating, at least in animal terms. "Would you like me to stop?" The words spilled out, feeling like a genuine confession. "I am Yellow Dog. I am a government operative, one of the 13. Yes, we thought you were Yellow Dog. We have the non-official cover list for all of the 13. And we know that Aryuna Bochung is a name you've used before when posing as a journalist." He broke off, took a deep breath, and seemed to redouble his efforts. "But it's good to get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak." "Stop now." "Too late. I've already started." "You said you'd stop," I replied, screaming out the words. "You promised you'd stop." "I said nothing of the sort. I said the ribs could be put back. That remains the case." In an instant, Goyo stopped thrashing. His eye was still open, but all of a sudden there was nothing behind it. Several weeks later, I could not say precisely how many, Chilyan sat opposite me with his big hairy hands clasped in silent contemplation. The documents on his desk were kept in place by grisly paperweights, little plinth-mounted bones and bottled shrunken things in vinegary solution. There were swords and ceremonial knives on the wall, framing a familiar reproduction watercolor showing the landing of the invasion fleet on Japanese soil. "You were good," he said eventually. "I'll give you that. My men genuinely thought they'd hit bottom when they got you to confess to being the journalist. It was a surprise to all concerned when that identity turned out to be a cover." "I'm glad I provided you with some amusement," I said. "If it hadn't been for that implant, we might never have known. Your people really should give some thought into making those things less detectable." "My people?" I asked. "The last time I checked, we were all working for the same government. I don't doubt that's how it feels in New High Karakoram. Out here, it's a different story. In case you hadn't realized, this is a special administrative volume. It's part of the Empire, but only in a very tenuous, politically ambiguous sense. They want what we can give them: raw materials, cheaply synthesized chemicals, mass-produced low-bulk consumer goods. But they don't want to think too hard about what we have to do to keep that river of commerce flowing. Laws have to be bent here, because otherwise there'd be no here. Look out the window, Yellow Dog." Visible through the partially shuttered window of his office, a good 4 or 5 li below, was a brutal, wintry landscape of stained ice, reaching all the way to the horizon. The sky was a rose pink, shading to midnight blue at the top of the window. Cutting through it along a diagonal was the twinkling sickle-like curve of a planetary ring system. Canyon-deep fissures cracked the surface, leaking feathery quills of yellow-white steam into the thin, poisonous atmosphere of that wind-swept sky. Here and there, an elbow of splintered rock broke the surface. There were no fixed communities on the moon. Instead, immense spider-like platforms, mounted on 6 or 8 intricate jointed legs, picked their way across the ever-shifting terrain in awesome slow motion. The platforms varied in size, but at the very least each supported a cluster of squat civic buildings, factories, refineries, and spacecraft handling facilities. Some of the platforms had deployed drilling rigs or cables into the fissures, sucking chemical nourishment from under the icy crust. A number were connected together by long, dangling wires, along which I made out the tiny suspended forms of cable cars, moving from platform to platform. "It's very pretty," I said. "It's a hellhole, frankly. Only 3 planets in the entire volume are even remotely amenable to terraforming, and not one of those 3 is on track for completion inside 500 years. We'll be lucky if any of them are done before the Founders' 2000th anniversary, let alone the 1000th. Most of the 80 million people under my stewardship live in domes and tunnels, with only a few alls of soil or glass between them and a horrible choking death." He unclasped his hands in order to run a finger across one of his desktop knickknacks. "It's not much of an existence, truth be told. But that doesn't mean we don't have an economy that needs fueling. We have jobs. We have vacancies for skilled labor. Machines do our drilling, but the machines need to be fixed and programmed by people down at the cutting face. We pay well for those prepared to work for us. And you come down hard on those who displease you. Local solutions to local problems, that's our mantra. You wouldn't understand, cozied up in the middle of the Empire. You pushed the dissidents and troublemakers out to the edge and left us to worry about them. He tapped a finger against his desk. Nestorian Christians, Buddhists, Islamists. It's 1,000 years since we crushed them, and they still haven't got over it. Barely a week goes by without some regressive fundamentalist element stirring up trouble, whether it's sabotage of one of our industrial facilities or a terrorist attack against the citizenship. And yet you sit there in New High Karakoram and shake your heads in disgust when we have the temerity to implement even the mildest security measures. I wouldn't call mass arrests, show trials, and public executions mild, I said tartly. Then try living here. I get the impression that's not really an option. Unless you mean living in prison for the rest of my life, or until NHK sends an extraction team. Chilyan made a pained expression. Let's be clear. You aren't my enemy. Quite the contrary. You are now an honored guest of the Kuchlug Special Administrative Volume. I regret what happened earlier, but if you'd admitted your true identity, none of that would have been necessary. He folded his arms behind his neck, leaned back in his chair with a creak of leather. We've got off on the wrong footing here, you and I. But how are we supposed to feel when the Empire sends undercover agents snooping into our territory? And not only that, but agents that persist in asking such puzzling questions. He looked at me with sudden, sharp intensity, as if my entire future hung on my response to what he was about to say. Just what is it about the phantoms that interests you so much, Yellow Dog? Why should you worry about my interest in a phenomenon that doesn't exist? I countered. Do you believe that, after what you saw on the Birkin Khaldun? I can only report what I saw. It would not be for me to make inferences. But still, why are we discussing this, Commander Chilyan? Because I'm intrigued. Our perception was that NHK probably knew a lot more about the phenomenon than we did. Your arrival suggests otherwise. They sent you on an intelligence-gathering mission, and the thrust of your inquiry indicates that you are at least as much in the dark as we are, if not more so. I can't speak for my superiors. No, you can't. But it seems unlikely that they'd have risked sending a valued asset into a trouble spot like Kuchlug without very good reason, which, needless to say, is deeply alarming. We thought the Corps had the matter under control. Clearly, they don't, which only makes the whole issue of the Phantoms even more vexed and troubling. What do you know? He laughed. You think I'm going to tell you just like that? You've as much as admitted that this goes beyond any petty political differences that might exist between NHK and Kuchlug. Let me report back to my superiors. I'll obtain their guarantee that there will be a two-way traffic in intelligence. I nodded firmly. Yes, we misjudged this one. I should never have come under deep cover, but we were anxious not to undermine your confidence in us by revealing the depth of our ignorance on the phenomenon. I assure you that in the future everything will be above board and transparent. We can set up a bilateral investigative team, pooling the best experts from here and back home. That easy, eh? We just shake hands and put it all behind us. The deception on your part, the torture on ours. I shrugged. You had your methods, I had mine. Chilyan smiled slightly. There's something you need to know. 2 days ago, not long after we dug that thing out of you, we did in fact send a communique to NHK. We informed them that one of their agents was now in our safekeeping. that she was being more than helpful in answering our questions, and that we would be happy to return her at the earliest opportunity. Go on. They told us that there was no such agent. They denied knowledge of either Aryuna Bochung or an operative named Yellow Dog. They made no demands for you to be returned, although they did say that if you were handed over, you'd be of interest to them. Do you know what this means? When I refrained from answering, though I knew precisely what it meant, Chilian continued. You've been disavowed, Yellow Dog. Left out in the cold, like a starving mongrel. His men came for me again, several days later. I was taken to a pressurized boarding platform, a spindly structure cantilevered out from the side of the government building. A cable car was waiting, a dull gray bulbous-ended cylinder swaying gently against its restraints. The guards pushed me aboard, then slammed the airtight door before turning a massive wheel to lock it shut. Chilian was already aboard the car, sitting in a dimpled leather chair with one leg crossed over the other. He wore huge fur-lined boots, equipped with vicious spurs. A little trip, I thought, he said, by way of welcome, indicating the vacant seat opposite his. The cable car lurched into motion. After reaching the limit of the boarding area, it passed through a long glass airlock, and then dropped sickeningly, plunging down so far that it descended under the lowest level of buildings and factory structures perched on the platform. One of the huge skeletal legs was rising towards us, the foot raised as if it intended to stomp down on the fragile little cable car. Yet just when it seemed we were doomed, the car began to climb again, creaking and swaying. Chilian was looking at something through a pair of tiny binoculars. Some piece of equipment, a probe or drill head, I presumed, being winched up from the surface into the underside of the platform. Is there a point to this journey? I asked. He lowered the binoculars and returned them to a leather case on his belt. Very much so. What I will show you constitutes a kind of test. I would advise you to be on your guard against the obvious. The cable car slid across the fractured landscape of the moon, traversing dizzyingly wide crevasses, dodging geysers, skimming past tilted rock faces which seemed on the verge of toppling over at any moment. We rose and descended several times, on each occasion passing over one of the walking platforms. Now and then there was an interruption, while we were switched to a different line, before once more plunging down towards the surface. After more than half an hour of this, just when my stomach was beginning to settle into the rhythm, we came to a definite halt on what was in all respects just another boarding platform, attended by a familiar retinue of guards and technical functionaries. Chilian and I disembarked, with his spurs clicking against the cleated metal flooring. With a company of guards for escort, we walked into the interior of the platform's largest building. The entire place had an oily ambience, rumbling with the vibration of distant drilling processes. It's a cover, Chilian said, as if he had read my thoughts. We keep the machines turning, but this is the one platform that doesn't have a useful production yield. It's a study facility instead. For studying what? Whatever we manage to recover, basically. Deep in the bowels of the platform, at a level which must have meant they were only just above the underside, was a huge holding tank, which, so Chilian informed me, was designed to contain the unrefined liquid slurry that would ordinarily have been pumped up from under the ice. In this platform the tank had been drained and equipped with power and lighting. The entire space had been partitioned into about a dozen ceilingless rooms, each of which appeared to contain a collection of garbage arranged within the cells of a printed grid laid out on the floor. Some of the cells held sizable clusters of junk, others were empty. Benches arranged around the edges of the cells were piled with bits of twinkly rubbish, along with an impressive array of analysis tools and recording devices. It looked as if it should have been a literal hive of activity, but the entire place was deserted. You want to tell me what I'm looking at here? Julian indicated a ladder. Go down and take a look for yourself. Examine anything that takes your fancy. Use any tools you feel like. Look in the notebooks and data files. Rummage. Break stuff. You won't be punished if you do. This is phantom technology, isn't it? You've recovered pieces of alien ships. I said this in a kind of awed whisper, as if I hardly dared believe it myself. Draw whatever conclusions you see fit. I shall be intensely interested in what you have to say. I started down the ladder. I had known from the moment I saw the relics that I would be unable to resist. How long have I got before I'm judged to have failed this test or whatever it is? Take your time, he said, smiling, but don't take too much. There seemed little point agonizing over which room to start with, assuming I had the time to examine more than one. The one I chose had the usual arrangement of grid, junk, and equipment benches. Lights burned from a rack suspended overhead. I stepped into the grid, striding over blank squares until I arrived at a promising little clump of mangled parts, some of them glittery, some of them charred to near blackness. Gingerly, I picked up one of the bits. It was a curving section of metallic foil, ragged along one edge, much lighter and stiffer than I felt it had any right to be. I tested the edge against a finger and drew a bead of blood. No markings or detail of any kind. I placed it back down on the grid and examined another item. Heavier this time, solid in my hands, like a piece of good carved wood. Flowing scroll-like green patterning on one convex surface. A suggestion of script, or a fragmented part of some script, in a language I did not recognize. I returned it to the grid and picked up a jagged, bifurcated thing like a very unwieldy sword or spearhead, formed in some metallic red material that appeared mirror-smooth and untarnished. In my hands the thing had an unsettling buzzing quality, as if there was still something going on inside it. I picked up another object, a dented blue-green box, embossed with dense geometric patterns, cross-woven into one another in a manner that made my head hurt. The lid of the box opened to reveal 6 egg-like white ovals, packed into spongy black material. There were 6 distinct spiral symbols painted onto the ovals, in another language that I did not recognize. I perused more objects in the grid, then moved to the benches where more items were laid out for inspection. I moved into one of the adjoining rooms. There was something different about the degree of organization this time. The grid was the same, but the objects in it had been sorted into rough groupings. In one corner cell was a pile of spiky metallic red pieces that obviously had something in common with the sword-like object I had examined in the other room. In the other lay a cluster of dense, curved pieces with fragmented green patterning on each. Each occupied cell held a similar collection of vaguely related objects. I examined another room, but soon felt that I had seen enough to form a ready opinion. The various categories of relic clearly had little in common, if they had all originated from the phantoms, either wrecked or damaged or attacked as they passed through the infrastructure. Then there was only one conclusion to be drawn. There was more than one type of phantom, which in turn meant there was more than one kind of alien. We were not just dealing with one form of intruder. Judging by the number of filled cells, there were dozens, many dozens of different alien technologies at play. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck bristle. Our probes and instruments had swept the galaxy clean, and still we had found no hint of anyone else out there. But these rooms said otherwise. Somehow or other we had managed to miss the evidence of numerous other galaxy-faring civilizations, all of which were at least as technologically advanced as the Mongol expansion. Other empires, somehow coexisting with ours. I was ready to return to Chilyan, but at the last moment, as I prepared to ascend the ladder, something held me back. It had all been too simple. Anyone with a pair of eyes in their head would have arrived at the same conclusion as I had. Chilyan had said it would be a test, and that I must pass it. It had been too easy so far. Therefore, I must have missed something. When we were back on the cable car, nosing down to the geysering surface, Chilyan stroked a finger against his chin and watched me with an intense snake-like fascination. "You returned to the rooms?" "Yes." "Something made you go back when it looked as if you'd already finished?" "It wouldn't have been in my interests to fail you." There was a gleam in his eye. "So what was it, Yellow Dog, that made you hesitate?" A feeling that I'd missed something. The obvious inference was that the collection implied the presence of more than one intruding culture. But you didn't need me to tell you that. "No," he acknowledged. So there had to be something else. I didn't know what, but when I went back into the second room, something flashed through my mind. I knew I had seen something in there before, even if it had been in a completely different context. I could not tell if he was pleased or disappointed. "Continue." "The green markings on some of the relics. They meant nothing to me at first, but I suppose my subconscious must have picked up on something even then. They were fragments of something larger, which I'd seen before." "Which was?" "Arabic writing," I told him. "Many people would be surprised to hear there was such a thing." "If they knew their history, they'd know that the Arabs had a written language. An elegant one, too. It's just that most people outside of academic departments won't have ever seen it, any more than they know what Japanese or the Roman alphabet looks like." "But you, on the other hand..." "In my work for the Khanate, I was obliged to compile dossiers on dissident elements within the Empire. Some of the Islamist factions still use a form of Arabic for internal communications." He sniffed through his nostrils, looking at me with his penetrating blue eyes. The cable car creaked and swayed. "It took my analysis experts 8 months to recognize that lettering had a human origin. The test is over. You have passed. But would you care to speculate on the meaning of your observation? Why are we finding Arabic on phantom relics?" "I don't know." "But indulge me." "It can only mean that there's an Islamist faction out there that we don't know about. A group with independent spacefaring capability. The means to use the infrastructure, despite all the access restrictions already in place." "And the other relics, where do they fit in?" "I don't know." "If I told you that, in addition to items we consider to be of unambiguously alien origin, we also found scraps of other vanished or obscure languages, or at least scripts and symbols connected to them, what would you say?" I admitted that I had no explanation for how such a thing might be possible. It was one thing to allow the existence of a secret enclave of technologically advanced Islamists, however improbable that might have been. It was quite another to posit the existence of many such enclaves, each preserving some vanished or atrophied branch of human culture. "Here is what's going to happen." He spoke the words as if there could be no possibility of dissent on my behalf. "As has already been made clear, your old life is over. utterly and finely. But there is still much that you can do to serve the will of heaven. The Khanate has only now taken a real interest in the phantoms, whereas we have been alert to the phenomenon for many years. If you care about the security of the Empire, you will see the sense in working with Kuchlug. You mean join the team analyzing those relics? As a matter of fact, I want you to lead it. He smiled. I could not tell if the idea had just occurred to him, or whether it had always been at the back of his mind. You've already demonstrated the acuteness of your observations. I have no doubt that you will continue to uncover truths that the existing team has overlooked. I can't just take over like that. He looked taken aback. Why ever not? A few days ago, I was your prisoner, I said. Not long before that, you were torturing me. There's no reason to suddenly start trusting me just on your say-so. You're wrong about that, he said, fingering one of the knives strapped across his chest. They'll trust who I tell them to trust. Absolutely and unquestioningly. Why? I asked. Because that's how we do things around here. So it was. I joined Chilyan's investigative team, immersing myself in the treasure trove of data and relics his people had pieced together in my absence. There was, understandably, a degree of reluctance to accept my authority, but Chilyan dealt with that in the expected manner, and slowly those around me came to a pragmatic understanding that it was either work with me or suffer the consequences. Relics and fragments continued to fall into our hands. Sometimes the ships that intruded into the infrastructure were damaged, as if the passing into our territory had been a violent one. Often, the subsequent encounter with one of our ships was enough to shake them to pieces, or at the very least, dislodge major components. The majority of these shards vanished without trace into the implacable machinery of the infrastructure. Even if the Quirkoi apparatus was beginning to fail, it was still more than capable of attending to the garbage left behind by its users. But occasionally, pieces lingered in the system, as if the walls had indigestion, waiting to be swept up by Chilyan's ships, and eventually brought home to this moon. As often as not, though, it was a trivial matter to classify the consignments, requiring only a glance at their contents. The work became so routine, in fact, and the quantity of consignments so high, that eventually I had no choice but to take a step back from hands-on analysis. I assembled 6 teams, and let them get on with it, requiring that they report back to me only when they had something of note. A new empire, or something odd from one of those we already knew about. That was when the golden egg fell into our hands. It was in the 7th month of my service under Chilyan, and I immediately knew that it originated from a culture not yet known to us. Perhaps it was a ship, or part of one. The outer hull was almost entirely covered in a quilt of golden platelets, overlapping in the manner of fish scales. The only parts not covered by the platelets were the dark apertures of sensors and thruster ports, and a small eye-shaped area on one side of the teardrop that we quickly identified as a door. Fearing that it might damage the other relics if it exploded under our examinations, I ordered that the analysis of the egg take place in a different part of the mining structure. Soon, though, my concern shifted to the welfare of the egg's occupants. We knew that there were beings inside it, even if we could not be sure if they were human. Scans had illuminated ghostly structures inside the hull. The intestinal complexity of propulsion subsystems, fuel lines, and tanks packed ingeniously tight, the fatty tissue of insulating layers, the bony divisions of armored partitions, the cartilaginous detailing of furniture and life support equipment. There were even ranks of couches, with 8 crew still reclining in them. Dead, or in suspended animation, it was impossible to tell. All we could see was their bones, a suggestion of humanoid skeletons, and there was no movement of those bones to suggest respiration. We got the door open easily enough. It was somewhat like breaking into a safe, but once we had worked out the underlying mechanism and the curiously alien logic that underpinned its design, it presented no insurmountable difficulties. Gratifyingly, there was only a mild gust of equalizing pressure when the door hinged wide, and none of the sensors arrayed around the egg detected any harmful gases. As far as we could tell, it was filled with an oxygen-nitrogen mix, only slightly different from that aboard our own ships. "What now?" Chilyan asked, fingering the patch of hair beneath his lip. "We'll send machines aboard now," I replied. "Just to be safe, in case there are any booby traps inside." He placed a heavy, thick-fingered hand on my shoulder. "What say we skip the machines and just take a look inside ourselves?" His tone was playful. "Not afraid, are we, Yellow Dog?" "Of course not," I answered. "There's no need to be. I'll go in first, just in case there are surprises." We walked across the floor, through the cordon of sensors, to the base of the attenuated metal staircase that led to the open door. The robots scuttled out of the way. My staff exchanged concerned glances, aware that we were deviating from a protocol we had spent weeks thrashing out to the last detail. I waved down their qualms. Inside, as we already knew from the scans, the egg was compartmented into several small chambers, with the crew in the middle section. The rear part contained most of the propulsion and life support equipment. Up front, in the sharp end, was what appeared to be a kind of pressurized cargo space. The egg still had power, judging by the presence of interior lighting, although the air aboard it was very cold and still. It was exceedingly cramped, requiring me to duck and Chilyan to stoop almost double. To pass from one compartment to the next, we had to crawl on our hands and knees through doors that were barely large enough for children. The external door was larger than the others, presumably because it had to admit a crew member wearing a spacesuit or some other encumbrance. Chilyan was the first to see the occupants. I was only a few seconds behind him, but those seconds stretched to years as I heard his words. "They are aliens after all, Yellow Dog, strapped in their seats like little pale monkeys. I can see why we thought they might be human. But they're not. Not at all. So much for the theory that every empire must represent a human enclave, no matter how incomprehensible the artifacts or script. That was never my theory, sir, but it's good to have it dismissed. They have masks on. I can see their faces, but I'd like a better look." Still on my knees, I said, "Be careful, sir. They're dead, Yellow Dog, stiff and cold as mummies." By the time I reached Chilyan, he had removed one of the intricate masks from the face of his chosen alien. In his hands it was tiny, like a delicate accessory belonging to a doll. He put it down carefully, placing it on the creature's lap. The alien was dressed in a quilted gold uniform, cross-buckled into the couch. It was the size of an 8-year-old child, but greatly skinnier in build, its torso and limbs elongated to the point where it resembled a smaller creature that had been stretched. Though its hands were gloved, the layout of the long, dainty-looking digits corresponded exactly to my own. 4 fingers had an opposed thumb, though each of the digits was uncommonly slender, such that I feared they might snap if we attempted to remove the gloves. Its head, the only part of it not covered by the suit, was delicate and rather beautiful, with huge dark eyes set in patches of black fur. Its nose and mouth formed one snout-like feature, suggestive of a dog or cat. It had sleek, intricate ears, running back along the side of its head. Save for the eye patches and a black nose at the tip of the snout, its skin varied between a pale buff or off-white. The alien's hands rested on a pair of small control consoles hinged to the sides of the couch. The consoles were flat surfaces, embossed with golden ridges and studs, devoid of markings. A second console angled down from the ceiling to form a blank screen at the creature's eye level. The other 7 occupants all had similar amenities. There were no windows and no controls or readouts in the orthodox sense. The aliens were all alike, with nothing on their uniforms to indicate rank or function. From what little I could see of their faces, the other 7 were identical to the one we had unmasked. I suppose I should have felt awed. Here I was, privileged to be one of the first 2 people in history to set eyes on true aliens. Instead, all I felt was a kind of creeping sadness, and a tawdry, unsettling feeling that I had no business in this place of death. "I've seen these things before," Chilion said, a note of disbelief in his words. "These aliens, sir? But this is the first time we've seen them." "I don't mean that. I mean, isn't there something about them that reminds you of something?" "Something of what, sir?" He ignored my question. "I also want this vehicle stripped down to the last bolt, or whatever it is holds it together. If we can hack into its navigation system, find an infrastructure map, we may be able to work out where they came from, and how the hell we've missed them until now." I looked at the embossed gold console and wondered what were our chances of hacking into anything, let alone the navigation system. "And the aliens, sir? What should we do with them?" "Cut them up. Find out what makes them tick." Almost as an afterthought, he added, "Of course, make sure they're dead first." The aliens were not the greatest surprise contained in the egg, but we did not realize that until the autopsy was underway. Chilion and I observed the procedure from a viewing gallery, looking down on the splayed and dissected creature. With great care, bits of it were being removed and placed on sterile metal trays. The interior organs were dry and husk-like, reinforcing the view that the aliens were in a state of mummification. Perhaps, we speculated, some kind of suspended animation to be used in emergency situations. But the function and placement of the organs was all too familiar. We could have been watching the autopsy of a monkey and not known the difference. The alien even had a tail, lightly striped in black and white. It had been contained within an extension of the clothing, tucked back into a cavity within the seat. That the creatures must have been intelligent was not open to dispute, but it was still dismaying to learn how human their brains looked when they were cut up. Small, certainly, yet with clear division of brain hemispheres, frontal and temporal lobes, and so on. Yet the real shock lay in the blood. It was not necessarily a surprise to find that it had DNA, or even that its DNA appeared to share the same protein coding alphabet as ours. There were, I was led to believe, sound arguments for how that state of affairs might have arisen independently, due to it being the most efficient possible replicating coding system, given the thermodynamic and combinative rules of carbon-based biochemistry. That was all well and good, but it entirely failed to explain what they found when they compared the aliens' chromosomes to ours. More on a whim than anything else, they had tested the alien blood with human-specific probes and found that chromosomes 1 and 3 of the alien were homologous to human chromosomes 3, 9, 14, and 21. There were also unexpectedly strong signals in the centromeric regions of the alien chromosomes when probed for human chromosomes 7 and 19. In other words, the alien DNA was not merely similar to ours. It was shockingly, confoundingly alike. The only possible explanation was that we were related. Chilion and I were trying to work out the ramifications of this when news came in from the team examining the pod. Ugon, my deputy, came scuttling into the autopsy viewing room, rubbing sweaty hands together. "We found something," he said, almost tongue-tied with excitement. Chilion showed him the hot-off-the-press summary from the genetics analysis. "So have we. Those aliens aren't alien. They came from the same planet we did. I thought they looked like lemurs. That's because they are." Ugan had as much trouble dealing with that as we did. I could almost hear the gears meshing in his brain, working through the possibilities. Aliens must have uplifted lemur stock in the deep past, using genetic engineering to turn them into intelligent tool-using beings. He raised a finger. Or other aliens spread the same genetic material on more than one world. If that were the case, these lemurs need not be from Greater Mongolia after all. "What news do you have for us?" Chilion asked, smiling slightly at Ugan's wild theorizing. "Come to the egg, please. It will be easier if I show you." We hastened after Ugan, both of us refraining from any speculation as to what he might have found. As it happened, I do not think either of us would have guessed correctly. In the sharp end of the egg, the investigators had uncovered a haul of cargo, much of which had now been removed and laid out on the floor for inspection. I glanced at some of the items as we completed the walk to the pod, recognizing bits and pieces from some of the other cultures we already knew about. Here was a branching, sharp-tipped metallic red thing, like an instrument for impaling. Here was a complexly manufactured casket, which opened to reveal ranks of nested white eggs, hard as porcelain. Here was a curving section of razor-sharp foil, polished to an impossible luster. Dozens more relics from dozens of other known empires, and still dozens more that represented empires of which we knew nothing. "They've been collecting things. Just like us," I said. "Including this," Ugan said, drawing my attention to the object that now stood at the base of the egg. It was the size and shape of a large urn, golden in construction, surfaced with bas-relief detailing, with 8 curved green windows set into its upper surface. I peered closer and rested a hand against the urn's throbbing skin. Through the windows burbled a dark liquid. In the dark liquid, something pale floated. I made out the knobbed ridge of a spine, a backbone pressing through flawless skin. It was a person, a human, a man, judging by his musculature, curled into fetal position. I could only see the back of his head, bald and waxy, scribed with fine white scars. Ridged cables dangled in the fluid, running towards what I presumed was a breathing apparatus, now hidden. Chilion looked through one of the other windows. After a lengthy silence, he straightened himself and nodded. "Do you think he was their prisoner?" "No way to tell, short of thawing him out and seeing what he has to say on the matter," Ugan said. "Do what you can," Chilion told Ugan. "I would very, very much like to speak to this gentleman." Then he leaned in closer, as if what he was about to say was meant only for Ugan's ears. "This would be an excellent time not to make a mistake, if you understand my meaning." I do not believe that Chilion's words had any effect on Ugan. He was either going to succeed or not, and the difference between the two outcomes depended solely on the nature of the problem, not his degree of application to the task. As it happened, the man was neither dead nor brain-dead, and his revival proved childishly simple. Many weeks were spent in preparation before the decisive moment, evaluating all known variables. When the day came, Ugan's intervention was kept to a minimum. He merely opened the preservation vat, extracted the man from his fluid cocoon, and, it must be said with fastidious care, removed the breathing apparatus. Ugan was standing by with all the tools of emergency medical intervention at his disposal, but no such assistance was required. The man simply convulsed, drew in several gulping breaths, and then settled into a normal respiratory pattern. But he had yet to open his eyes or signal any awareness in the change of his surroundings. Scans measured brain activity, but at a level indicative of coma rather than consciousness. The same scans also detected a network of microscopic machines in the man's brain, and much of his wider nervous system. Though we could not see these implants as clearly as those we had harvested from the lemur, they were clearly derived from a different technology. Where had he come from? What did he know of the phantoms? For weeks it appeared that we would have no direct answer to these questions. There was one thing, one clue, but we almost missed it. Many days after the man's removal from the vat, one of Ugan's technicians was working alone in the laboratory, where we kept our new guest. The lights were dimmed, and the technician was using an ultraviolet device to sterilize some culture dishes. By chance, the technician noticed something glowing on the side of the man's neck. It turned out to be a kind of tattoo, a sequence of horizontal symbols that was invisible except under ultraviolet stimulation. I was summoned to examine the discovery. What I found was a word in Arabic, Altair, meaning eagle, and a string of digits, 20 in all, composed of 9 numerical symbols, and the 10th, what the pre-Mongol scholars called in their dead language theka, or circulus, or figura nihili, the round symbol that means literally nothing. Our mathematics incorporates no such entity. I have heard it said that there is something in the Mongol psyche that abhors the very concept of absence. Our mathematics cannot have served us badly, for upon its back we have built a 500-year-old galactic empire, even if the Korkoi gave us the true keys to that kingdom. But I have also heard it said that our system would have been much less cumbersome had we adopted that Arabic symbol for nothing. No matter. It was what the symbols told me that was important, not what they said about our choice of number system. In optimistic anticipation that he would eventually learn to speak, and that his tongue would turn out to be Arabic, I busied myself with preparations. For a provincial thug, Chilian had a library as comprehensive as anything accessible from NHK. I retrieved primers on Arabic, most of which were tailored for use by security operatives hoping to crack Islamist terror cells, and set about trying to become an interpreter. But when the man woke, which was weeks later, by which time it felt as if I had been studying those primers for half my life, all my preparations might as well have been for nothing. He was sitting up in bed, monitored by machines and watched by hidden guards, when I came into the room. Aside from the technician who had first noticed his return to consciousness, the man had seen no other human being since his arrival. I closed the door and walked to his bedside. I sat down next to him, adjusting the blue silk folds of my skirt decorously. "I am Yellow Dog," I told him in Arabic, speaking the words slowly and carefully. "You are among friends. We want to help you, but we do not know much about you." He looked at me blankly. After a few seconds, I added, "Can you understand me?" His expression and response told me everything I needed to know. He spoke softly, emitting a string of words that sounded superficially Arabic without making any sense to me at all. By then I had listened to enough recordings to know the difference between Arabic and baby talk, and all I was hearing was gibberish. "I'm sorry," I said. "I do not understand you. Perhaps if we started again, slower this time." I touched a hand to my breast. "I am Yellow Dog. Who are you?" He answered me then, and maybe it was his name, but it could just as easily have been a curt refusal to answer my question. He started looking agitated, glancing around the room as if it was only now that he was paying due regard to his surroundings. He fingered the thin cloth of his blanket, and rubbed at the bandage on his arm where a catheter had been inserted. Once more I told him my name and urged him to respond in kind, but whatever he said this time was not the same as his first answer. "Wait," I said, remembering something, a contingency I had hoped not to have to use. I reached into my satchel and retrieved a printout. I held the filmy paper before me and read slowly from the Adhan, the Muslim call to prayer. My pronunciation must still not have been perfect, because I had to repeat the words 3 or 4 times before some flicker of recognition appeared behind his eyes, and he began to echo what I was saying. Yet even as he spoke the incantation, there was a puzzlement in his voice, as if he could not quite work out why we should be engaged in this odd parlor game. "So I was half right," I said, when he had fallen silent again, waiting for me to say something. "You know something of Islamic culture, but you do not understand anything I say, except when I speak words that have not been permitted to change in 15 centuries, and even then you only just grasp what I mean to say." I smiled, not in despair, but in rueful acknowledgment that the journey we had to make would be much longer and more arduous than I had imagined. Continuing in Mongol, so that he could hear my tongue, I said, "But at least we have something, my friend. A stone to build on. That's better than nothing, isn't it?" "Do you understand me now?" he asked, in flawless Mongol. I was astonished, quite unable to speak. Now that I had grown accustomed to his baldness and pallor, I could better appreciate those aspects of his face that I had been inclined to overlook before. He had delicate features, kind and scholarly. I had never been attracted to men in a sexual sense, and I could not say that I felt any such longing for this man. But I saw the sadness in his eyes, the homesick flicker that told me he was a long way from family and friends, such as I have never known but can easily imagine, and I knew that I wished to help him. "You speak our language," I said eventually, as if the fact of it needed stating. "It is not a difficult one." "What is your name?" "I caught something that sounded like filthy hound, but that cannot have been correct." I was trying to speak Arabic, and failing, obviously. "My name is Yellow Dog. It's a code, an operational identifier, therefore not your real name." "Ariuna'a," I said softly. "I use it sometimes, but around here they call me Yellow Dog." "Muhunat," he said, touching his sternum. "Muhunad," I repeated. Then, "If you understood my name, or thought you understood it, why didn't you answer me until I spoke Mongolian? My Arabic can't be that bad, surely." "You speak Arabic like someone who has only heard a whisper of a whisper of a whisper. Some of the words are almost recognizable, but they are like glints of a gold in a stream." He offered me a smile, as if it hurt him to have to criticize. "You were doing your best. But the version of Arabic I speak is not the one you think you know. How many versions are there?" "More than you realize, evidently." He paused. "I think I know where I am. We are inside the Mongol expansion. We were on the same track until 659, by my calendar." "What other calendar is there?" "You count from the death of a warrior deity. We count from the flight of the prophet from Mecca. The year now is 1604 by the Caliphate's reckoning, 999 by your own, 2226 by the calendar of the United Nations. Really, we are quibbling over mere centuries. The smiling ones use a much older dating system, as they must." I interrupted him. "What are you talking about? You are an emissary from a previously hidden Islamic state, that is all. At some point in the 500 years of the Mongol expansion, your people must have escaped central control to establish a secret colony or network of colonies on the very edge of the infrastructure. It is not like that, Aryuna. Not like that at all. Then he leaned higher on the bed, like a man who had just remembered an urgent errand. How exactly did I get here? I had not been tasked to gather intelligence on the Mongols. Not this time around. The lemurs, I answered. We found you with them. I watched him shudder, as if the memory of something awful had only just returned. You mean I was their prisoner, I think. Then he looked at me curiously. Your questions puzzle me, Aryuna. Our data on the Mongols was never of the high test quality, but we had always taken it for granted that you understood. Understood what? The troubling nature of things, he said. The cable car pitched down from the boarding platform, ducking beneath the base of the immense walking platform. After a short while, it came to an abrupt halt, swaying slightly. Chil-Yan pulled out his binoculars and focused on a detail under the platform, between the huge, slowly moving machinery of the skeletal support legs. There, he said, passing me the binoculars. I took them with trembling hands. I had been on my way to Muhunad for one of our fruitless but not unpleasant conversational sessions when Chil-Yan's men had diverted me to the cable car platform. What am I supposed to be looking at? Press the stud on the side. I did so. Powerful gyroscopes made the binoculars twist in my hands, tracking and zooming in on a specific object, a thing hanging down from the underside like the weight on the end of a plumb line. I recalled now the thing I had seen the first time Chil-Yan had accompanied me in the cable car, the thing that he had been examining with the binoculars. I had thought it was some kind of test probe or drilling gear being winched back into the platform. I saw now that I had been wrong. I did need to see his face to know that I was looking at Muhunad. He had been stuffed into a primitive spacesuit, blackened by multiple exposures to scorching heat and corrosive elements. They had him suspended from his feet, with his head nearest the ground. He was being lowered down towards one of those outgassing rifts in the surface of the Qing Shui moon. You can't be doing this, I said. If there was any other way, Chil-Yan said, in a tone of utter reasonableness. But clearly there isn't. He's been dragging his heels, giving us nothing. Spoke too soon early on, confided too much in you, and chose to clam up. Obviously, we can't have that. Chil-Yan opened a walnut-veneered cabinet and took out a microphone. He clicked it on and tapped it against his knee before speaking. Can you hear me, Muhunad? I hope your view is as spectacular as ours. I am speaking from the cable car that you may be able to see to your right. We are about level with your present position, although you will soon be considerably lower than us. No, I said. Chil-Yan raised a calming hand. He hadn't even bothered to have me tied into the seat. Do you hear that, Muhunad? You still have an admirer. Then he said, Lower the line, please. Take him to half his present elevation. Can you see that he's told you everything he knows? I asked, tossing the binoculars against the floor. He's told us as little as he could get away with, Chil-Yan replied, placing a hand over the end of the microphone to muffle his words. We could go through the usual rigmarole of conventional interrogation, but I think this will prove much more effective. We'll learn far more from him alive than dead. He looked at me pityingly. You think I don't know that? Of course I'm not going to kill him, but very soon, unless he chooses to talk, he'll be wishing I did. The winch dropped Muhunad to within 15 or 20 alls of the surface, just above the point where the outgassing material became opaque. "I can hear you," a voice said over the cable car's speaker system, "but I have told you everything I intend to. Nothing you can do now will make any difference." "We'll see, won't we?" Chil-Yan said. To me, confidingly, he said, "By now he will be in extreme discomfort. You and I are fine, but we have the benefit of a functioning life support system. His suit is damaged. At the moment, his primary concern is extreme cold, but that will not remain the case for very much longer. As he nears the fissure, it is heat that will begin to trouble him. You can tell the woman, Arjuna, that I am sorry it was necessary to withhold information from her," Muhunad said. "Her kindness was appreciated. I think she is the only one of you with a heart." "There's no need for me to tell her anything," Chil-Yan replied. "She's listening in. Aren't you, Yellow Dog?" Somewhat to my surprise, he passed me the microphone. "Talk to him. Reason with your favorite prisoner if you imagine it will help." "Muhunad," I said, "listen to me now. I have no reason to lie to you. Chil-Yan means what he says. He's going to put you through hell until he finds out what you know. I've seen him murder people already just to get at the truth." "I appreciate the concern for my welfare," he said, with sincerity that cut me to the bone. "Lower him to 5 alls," Chil-Yan said. Is it necessary to document all that happened to Muhunad? I suppose not. The essential thing is that the pain eventually became intolerable, and he began to tell Chil-Yan some of the things my master was desirous of knowing. What we learned was Muhunad was a pilot, a man surgically adapted for optimum control of a ship with extreme infrastructure agility. His implants were part of the interface system by which he flew his vehicle. It turned out that Muhunad's people had become aware of the breakdown of infrastructure integrity many decades ago, long before it had come to our attention. The difference was, rather than pretending that the problem did not exist, or entrusting it to a single agent like myself, they had dedicated almost their entire state apparatus to finding a solution. Think of Chil-Yan's research multiplied by 1,000. There were countless men and women like Muhunad, brave angels tasked with mapping the weak spots in the infrastructure, the points of leakage, and learning something of the other empires beginning to spill into their own. They knew enough about the properties of those weak points, enough to slip through them, gather intelligence, and still return home. The rate of attrition was still high. Muhunad was a criminal, convicted of a crime that would have been considered petty in our own society, but which normally merited the death penalty in his. In his case, he had been offered the chance to redeem himself by becoming a pilot. They knew about us. They had been intercepting our lost message packets for years, and had even found a couple of our ships with living crew. That was how they had learned Mongolian. They also knew about dozens of other empires, including the lemurs. "They caught me," Muhunad said, "as they catch any unwary traveler. They are to be feared." "They look so harmless," Chil-Yan answered. "They are vicious beyond words. They are a hive society, with little sense of self. The beings you found, the dead ones, would have sacrificed themselves to ensure their cargo returned home intact. It did not mean that they did so out of any consideration for my well-being. But there are worse things than the lemurs out there. There are the beings we call the Smiling Ones. You will meet them sooner or later. They have been in space for millions of years, and their technology is only matched by their loathing for the likes of you and I." "Tell us about your state," Chil-Yan probed. We call it the Shining Caliphate. It is an empire encompassing 7,000 star systems, comprising 20,000 settled worlds, half of which are of planet class, or at least the size of major moons. A third of those worlds are terraformed, or on the way to completion. You are lying. If an empire of that size already existed, we would have seen signs of it. That is because you are not looking in the right place. The Shining Caliphate is here, now, all around you. It occupies much the same volume as your own empire. It even has the same home world. You call it Greater Mongolia. We call it Earth. Lies. But I knew Muhunad was not lying to us. I think it likely that even Chilion knew it too. He was a brutal man, but not a stupid or unimaginative one. But I do not think he could bear to contemplate his place in a universe in which Muhunad spoke the truth. Chilion was a powerful man, with an empire of his own on the very edge of the one he was meant to serve. If our empire was a map spread across a table, then he controlled more than could be covered by the palm of a hand. Yet if what Muhunad said was correct, then that map was but one unexceptional page in a vast atlas, each page a dominion in its own right, of which our own was neither the most powerful nor the most ancient. Set against such immensity, Chilion controlled almost nothing. For a man like him, that realization would have been intolerable. But perhaps I am crediting him with too much intelligence, too much imagination, and he was simply unable to grasp what Muhunad was telling us. What he could grasp, however, was an opportunity. I was with them when we brought Muhunad to the room where the couch had been prepared. I had heard of the existence of the couch, but this was my first sight of it. Even knowing its function, I could not help but see it as an instrument of torture. Muhunad's reaction to begin struggling against the guards who held him showed that he saw the couch in similar terms. Behind the guards loomed white-coated doctors and technicians, including the Slav who had torn out my implant. "This isn't going to hurt you," Chilion said magnanimously. "It's to help you." The couch was a skeletal white contraption, encumbered with pads and restraints, and delicate hinged accessories that would fold over the occupant once they had been secured in place. "I do not understand," Muhunad said, although I think he did. "We have studied your implants and deduced something of their function," Chilion said. "Not enough to learn everything about them, but enough to let you control one of our ships instead of the one you were meant to fly. It will not work. No one is pretending it will be easy, but it is in your interests to do what you can to make it succeed. Help us navigate the infrastructure, the way you do, finding the weak points and slipping through them, and we will let you return home. I do not believe you. You have no option but to believe me. If you cannot assist me in this matter, you will have concluded your usefulness to me. Given the trouble I would get into if New High Karakoram learned of your existence, I would have no option but to dispose of you." "He means it," I said forcefully. "Help us fly the ships, Muhunad. Whatever happens, it's better than staying here." He looked at me as if I was the one thing in the universe he was willing to trust. Given all that had happened to him since leaving his people, it did not surprise me in the slightest. "Plug him in," Chilion told the technicians. "And don't be too tender about it." The name of the ship was the River Volga. She was half a li in length, her frontal stabilization spine suggesting the curving whiskers of a catfish. She had been a merchant vehicle once. Latterly, she had been equipped for scouring the Parvan tract for phantom relics, and most recently she had been hardened and weaponed for an exploratory role. She would carry 6 of us: Muhunad, Chilyan, Ugan, and 2 more members of the technical staff. Their names were Jura and Bakbayar, and myself. Next to her, identical in almost all respects, was the Mandate of Heaven. The only significant distinction between the 2 craft was that Muhunad would be piloting the river Volga, while the Mandate of Heaven followed close behind, slaved to follow the same trajectory to within a fraction of an auld. The navigation and steering mechanisms of both ships had been upgraded to permit high agility maneuvers, including reversals, close proximity wall skimming, and suboptimal portal transits. It did not bear thinking about the cost of equipping those 2 ships, or where the funds had been siphoned from, but I supposed the citizens of the Kuchlug Special Administrative Volume would be putting up with the hardships for a little while longer. We spent 5 days in shakedown tests before entering the tract, scooting around the system, dodging planets and moons in high-G swerves. During that time, Muhunad's integration into the harness was slowly improved. More and more ship systems brought under his direct control, until he reported the utmost confidence in being able to handle the river Volga during infrastructure flight. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Truly, Haryuna. This ship feels as much a part of me as anything I ever flew in the Shining Caliphate. But indescribably less sophisticated. I would not wish to hurt your feelings. Given your resources, you have not done too badly." The transit, when it came, was utterly uneventful. The Mandate of Heaven reported some minor buffeting, but this was soon negated following a refinement of the control linkage between the 2 ships. Then we had nothing to do but wait until Muhunad detected one of the points of weakening, where with a judicious alteration in our trajectory we might slip from one version of the infrastructure to another. Did I seriously think that Chilyan would keep his promise of returning Muhunad to his own people? Not really, unless my master had hopes of forging some kind of alliance with the Shining Caliphate, to use as leverage against the central authority of New High Karakorum. If that was his intention, I did not think he had much hope of succeeding. The Caliphate would have every reason to despise us, and yet, given the demonstrably higher level of both their technology and intelligence, there was nothing they could possibly want from us, except craven submission and cowering remorse for the Holocaust we had visited upon their culture nearly 1,000 years earlier. No, I did not think Muhunad stood much chance of returning home. Perhaps he knew that as well. But it was better to pretend to believe in Chilyan's promises than incur his bored wrath back on the Qing Shui moon. At least this way, Muhunad could continue to be materially useful to Chilyan, and therefore too valuable to hurt. The detection of a weakening in the tunnel geometry, Muhunad explained, was only just possible given the blunt sensibilities of our instruments. The Caliphate kept detailed maps of such things, but no record had survived his capture by the lemurs, and the information was too voluminous to be committed to memory. He recalled that there were 4 weak points in the section of infrastructure we call the Parvan Tract, but not their precise locations or detailed properties. No matter. He had every incentive to succeed. We overshot the first weakening, but the incident gave Muhunad a chance to refine the manner in which he sifted the sensor data, and he was confident that he would not make the same error twice. Rather than attempt a reversal, it was agreed to push forward until we encountered the next weakening. It happened 2 days later, halfway to Gansu Nexus. This time, Muhunad started to detect the subtle changes in the properties of the tunnel in time to initiate a hard slowdown, echoed by the Mandate of Heaven immediately to our stern. We had been warned that the passage would be rough. This was an understatement. Fortunately, we were all braced and ready when it came. We had had 2 minutes' warning before the moment arrived. Even then the ship gave every indication of coming close to breakup. She whinnied like a horse, her structural members singing as if they had been plucked. Several steering vanes broke loose during the swerve, but the River Volga had been equipped to withstand losses that would have cripped a normal ship. All that happened was that hull plates swung open and new vanes pushed out to replace the missing ones. Behind us, the Mandate of Heaven suffered slightly less damage. Muhunad had been able to send correctional steering signals to her guidance system, allowing her to follow a less treacherous path. And then we were back in the tunnel, traveling normally. To all intents and purposes, it was as if nothing had happened. We appeared to be still inside the Parvan Tract. "We have become phantoms now," Muhunad informed us. "This is someone else's infrastructure." Chilyan leaned over the control couch, where our pilot lay in a state of partial paralysis, wired so deeply into the River Volga's nervous system that his own body was but an incidental detail. Around us, the bridge instruments recorded normal conditions of infrastructure transit. "Where are we?" "There's no way of telling. Not with these sensors. Not until we emerge." "In the Gansu Nexus?" "Yes," he replied. "Or whatever they call it. There will be risks. You will not have seen many phantoms emerge into your version of the Nexus, because most such ships will make every effort to slip through another weakening." "Why?" He spoke as if the answer should have been obvious. "Because unless they are pilots like me on specific intelligence-gathering missions, they would rather keep transitioning between versions of the infrastructure than emerge into what is likely to be a densely populated interchange. Eventually, they hope to detect the microsignatures in the tunnel physics that indicate that they have returned home." "Signatures which we can't read," I said. "I will attempt to refine my interpretation of the sensor data. Given time, I may be able to improve matters, but that is some way off." "We'll take our chances with Gansu," Chilyan said. There was, as I understood it, a small but non-negligible possibility that the weakening had shunted us back into our own version of the tract. We would know if we emerged into the Nexus and I saw advertisements for Sorkin Shira rental ponies. Muhunad assured us, however, that such an outcome was very unlikely. Once we were elsewhere, we would only get home again by throwing the dice repeatedly until our own special number came up. For all that, when we did emerge into the Gansu Nexus, my first thought was that Muhunad had been wrong about those odds. Somehow or other, we had beaten them and dropped back into our own space. As the door opened to admit us back into the spherical volume of the hollowed-out moon, I had the same impression of teeming wealth, of a city packed tight around the central core, of luminous messages rising up the 99 golden spokes, of the airspace thick with jewel-bright ships and gaudily patterned moth-like shuttles, the glittering commerce of 10,000 worlds. And yet, it only took a second glimpse to see that I was wrong. This was no part of the Mongol expansion. The ships were wrong. The shuttles were wrong. Cruder and clumsier than even our most antiquated ships. The city down below had a haphazard ramshackle look to it, its structures ugly and square-faced. The message on the spokes were spelled out in the angular letters of that pre-Mongol language, Latin. I could not tell if they were advertisements, news reports, or political slogans. We slowed down, coming to a hovering standstill relative to the golden spokes and the building-choked core. The Mandate of Heaven had only just cleared the portal entrance, with the door still open behind it. I presumed that some automatic system would not permit it to close with a ship still so close. Chilyan was a model of patience by his standards. He gave Muhunad several minutes to digest the information arriving from the River Volga's many sensors. "Well, pilot?" he asked, when that interval had elapsed. "Do you recognize this place?" "Yes," Muhunad said, "I do. And we must leave, now." "Why so nervous? I've seen those ships. They look even more pathetic and fragile than ours must have seemed to you." "They are. But there is no such thing as a harmless interstellar culture. These people have only been in space for a couple of 100 years. Barely 150 since they stumbled on the infrastructure, but they still have weapons that could hurt us. Worse, they are aggressors." "Who are they?" I whispered. "The culture I mentioned to you back on the Qing Shui moon. The ones who are now in their 23rd century. You would call them Christians, I suppose." "Nestorians?" Chilian asked, narrowing his eyes. "Another offshoot of the same cult, if one wishes to split hairs. Not that many of them are believers now. There are even some Islamists among them, although there is little about the Shining Caliphate that they would find familiar." "Perhaps we can do business with them," Chilian mused. "I doubt it. They would find you repulsive, and they would loathe you for what you did to them in your history." It was as if Muhunad had not spoken at all. When he alluded to such matters, Chilian paid no heed to his words. "Take us closer to the core," he said. "We didn't weld all this armor onto the Volga for nothing." When Muhunad did not show readiness to comply with Chilian's order, a disciplinary measure was administered through the input sockets of the harness. Muhunad stiffened against his restraints. Then, evidently deciding that death at the hands of the Christians was no worse than torture by Mongols, he began to move us away from the portal. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I know you only want to do what's best for us." "I am sorry as well," he said, when Chilian was out of earshot. "Sorry for being so weak that I do what he asks of me, even when I know it is wrong." "No one blames you," I replied. We had crossed 500 li without drawing any visible attention from the other vessels, which continued to move through the sphere as if going about their normal business. We even observed several ships emerge and depart through portals. But then, quite suddenly, it was as if a great shoal of fish had become aware of the presence of two sleek, hungry predators nosing through their midst. All around us, from one minute to the next, the various craft began to dart away, abandoning whatever course or errand they had been on before. Some of them ducked into portals, or lost themselves in the thicket of spokes, while others fled for the cover of the core. I tensed. Whatever response we were due was surely on its way by now. As it happened, we did not have long to wait. In contrast to the civilian vessels attempting to get as far away from us as possible, 3 ships were converging on us. We studied them on high magnification, on one of the display screens in the River Volga's bridge. They were shaped like arrowheads, painted with black and white stripes, and the odd markings of the Christians. Their blade-sharp leading edges bristled with what could have been sensors, refueling probes, or weapons. From his couch, Muhunad said, "We are being signaled. I believe I can interpret the transmission. Would you like to see it?" "Put it on," Chilian said. We were looking at a woman wearing a heavy black uniform, shiny like waxed leather. She was pinned back into a heavily padded seat. I did not doubt that I was looking at the pilot of one of the ships racing to intercept us. Much of her face was hidden under a globular black helmet, with a red-tinted visor lowered down over her eyes. On the crown of the helmet was a curious symbol, a little drawing of the earth overlaid with lines of latitude and longitude, and flanked by what I took to be a pair of laurel leaves. She was speaking into a microphone, her words coming over the bridge speaker. I wished I had studied more dead languages at the academy. Then again, given my lack of success with Arabic, perhaps I would still not have understood her Latin either. What was clear was that the woman was not happy, that her tone was becoming ever more strident. At last she muttered something that, had she been speaking Mongol, might have been some dismissive invitation to go to hell. "Perhaps we should turn after all," Chilian said, or started to say, but by then the 3 ships had loosed their missiles, 4 apiece, grouping into 2 packs of 6, 1 for the Mandate of Heaven and 1 for us. Muhunad needed no further encouragement. He whipped us around with all haste, pushing the river Volga's thrust to its maximum. Again, the stress of it was enough to set the ship protesting. At the same time, Muhunad brought our own weapons into use, running those guns out on their magnetic cradles and firing at the missiles as they closed distance between us and the Christians. Given the range and efficacy of our beam weapons, it would not have troubled him to eliminate the 3 ships. In concentrating on the missiles, not the pursuers, he was doing all that he could not to inflame matters further. As an envoy of Greater Mongolia, I suppose I should have been grateful, but I was already beginning to doubt that the fate of my empire was going to be of much concern for me. Because we had turned around, the Mandate of Heaven was the first to reach the portal. By then the door had begun to close, but it only took a brief assault from the Mandate's chaser guns to snip a hole in it. Muhunad had destroyed 9 of the 12 missiles by this point, but the remaining 3 were proving more elusive. In witnessing the deaths of their brethren, they appeared to have grown more cunning. By the time the Mandate cleared the portal, the 3 had arrived within 15 li of the river Volga. By switching to a different fire pattern, Muhunad succeeded in destroying 2 of them, but the last one managed to evade him until it had come within 5 li. At that point, bound by the outcome of some ruthless logical decision-making algorithm, the missile opted to detonate rather than risk coming any closer. It must have hoped to inflict fatal damage on us, even at 5 li. It very nearly did. I recalled what our pilot had said about there being no such thing as a harmless interstellar culture. The blast inflicted severe damage to our rear shielding and drive assembly, knocking off another 2 stabilization vanes. And then we were through, back into the infrastructure. We had survived our first encounter with another galactic empire. More were to follow. In my mind's eye, I have an image of a solitary tree, bare of leaves, so that its branching structure is laid open for inspection. The point where each branch diverges from a larger limb is a moment of historical crisis, where the course of world events is poised to swerve onto one of 2 tracks. Before his death, our founder spoke of having brought a single law to the 6 directions of space, words that have a deep resonance for all Mongols, as if it was our birthright to command the fundamental fabric of reality itself. They were prescient words, too, for the bringing of unity to Greater Mongolia, let alone the first faltering steps toward the expansion, had barely begun. 54 years after his burial, our fleet conquered the islands of Japan, extending the empire as far east as it was possible to go. But the day after our fleet landed, a terrible storm battered the harbors of those islands, one that would surely have repelled or destroyed our invasion fleet had it still been at sea. At the time, it was considered a great good fortune, a sure sign that heaven had ordained this invasion by delaying that storm. Yet who is to say what would have become of Japan had it not fallen under Mongol authority? By the same token, who is to say what would have become of our empire if its confident expansion had been checked by the loss of that fleet? We might not have taken Vienna and the cities of Western Europe, and then the great continents on the other side of the ocean. I thought of Muhunad's shining caliphate, The common view is that the Islamists were monotheistic savages until swept under the tide of the Mongol Enlightenment. But I am mindful that history is always written by the victors. We regard our founder as a man of wisdom and learning first, and a warrior second, a man who was respectful of literacy, curious about the sciences, and who possessed a keen thirst for philosophical inquiry. Might the conquered have viewed him differently, I wonder? Especially if our empire fell, and we were not there to gilden his name. No matter. All that need concern us is that solitary tree, that multiplicity of branches reaching ever upward. After the moment of crisis, the point of bifurcation, there should be no further contact between one branch and the next. In one branch, the Mongols take the world. In another, the Islamists. In another, some obscure sect of Christians. In another, much older branch, none of these empires ever become a gleam in history's eye. In an even older one, the lemurs are masters of creation, not some hairless monkey. But what matters is that all these empires eventually find the infrastructure. In some way that I cannot quite grasp, and perhaps will never truly understand, the Khorkhoi machinery exists across all those branches, not simply as multiple copies of the same infrastructure, but as a single entity that in some way permits the reunification of those branches. As if, having grown apart, they begin to knot back together again. I do not think this is intentional. If it were, the leaky nature of the infrastructure would have been apparent to us 500 years ago. It seems more likely to me that it is growing leaky, that some kind of insulation is beginning to wear away, an insulation that prevents history short-circuiting itself, as it were. But perhaps I am wrong to second-guess the motives of aliens whose minds we will never know. Perhaps all of this is unfolding according to some inscrutable and deliriously protracted scheme of our unwitting, worm-like benefactors. I do not think we will ever know. I shall spare you the details of all the encounters that followed, as we slipped from one point of weakness to another, always hoping that the next transition would be the one that brought us back to Mongol space, or at least into an empire we could do business with. By the time of our 8th or 9th transition, I think Chilyan would have been quite overjoyed to find himself a guest of the Shining Caliphate. I think he would have even settled for a humbling return to the Christians. By the time we had scuttled away from empires as strange or as brazenly hostile as those of the Fish People or the Thin Men, the Christians had come to seem like very approachable fellows indeed. But it was not to be. And when we dared to imagine that we had seen the worst that the branching tree of historical possibilities could offer, that we had done well not to stray into the dominion of the lemurs, that heaven must yet be ordaining our adventure, we had the glorious misfortune to fall into the realm of the smiling ones. They came hard and fast, and did not trifle with negotiation. Their claw-like green ships moved without thrust, cutting through space as if space itself was a kind of fluid they could swim against. Their beam weapons etched glimmering lines of violet across the void, despite the fact that they were being deployed in hard vacuum. They cut into us like scythes. I knew then that they could have killed us in a flash, but that they preferred to wound, to maim, to toy. The river Volga twisted like an animal in agony, and then there was a gap in my thoughts wide enough for a lifetime. The first thing that flashed through my mind, after I returned to consciousness, was frank amazement that we were still alive, that the ship had not burst open like a ripe fruit and spilled us all into vacuum. The second thing was that given the proximity of the attacking vehicles, our stay of execution was unlikely to be long. I did not need the evidence of readouts to tell me that the river Volga had been mortally wounded. The lights were out, artificial gravity had failed, and in the place of the normal hiss and chug of her air recirculators, there was an ominous silence, broken only by the occasional creak of some stressed structural member, cooling down after being heated close to boiling point. "Commander Chilyan," I called into the echoing darkness. No immediate